people understand the energy transition and the issues around energy transition and how we can educate people and help them develop knowledge towards climate change and the energy and sustainability basically. So today, Claire, briefly about me, I'm in the energy industry. I've worked in the energy industry for up to 7 years. I have an academic background in renewable energy and electronics engineering. And I'm here today. Today, we're going to be discussing about some of the very pertinent issues that have been going on in the energy sector and in the energy transition nexus, which, as we all know, COP29 just finished, and there was a big debate on oil and gas, on what do we do. Some a group are of the opinion that we should end oil and gas production, and another group are of the opinion that we need it. And so they might have a point. They both have a point. So I think today we just want to delve down into what are the impacts of this energy transition, this critical energy transition on the oil and gas sector, which has been a good source of energy supply or a source of energy supply for a couple of decades, and we're at the transition point where we need to, understand the pathway for the future. So today I have here with me um a renowned energy veteran. We're privileged to be in a course with him during our master's program, my master's program in Cranfield University for health and safety. And we had a wonderful session with you, and it was one that has stuck with me for probably for the rest of my life because it was more than a session. It was like a life lesson in energy and just life generally. So we thought that you'd be the best person to give us your insights and your knowledge you have about energy, the energy sector, risk, human factors associated with all of that. So help me welcome Rob Miles. Sorry for calling you Doctor. I know you're not. Help me
Well,
welcome. Help
that's
me,
lovely.
help me welcome Robert Miles. He is an expert in risk assessment, risk management, with renowned decades of experience in the energy sector and oil and gas sector. So today he's going to be, giving us a breakdown. He was also the chair of human and organizational factors at the Energy Institute for over 2 years. So yes, help me welcome him, and I would urge each and every one of us here and those joining to glean from his wealth of knowledge and experience. Yes, and you enjoy it. So thank you, Dr. Rob. Rob Miles, here you
That's all right.
go.
Look, thank you very much, David. And once I've regained control of my ego, I will give you a presentation. Um, I have personal experience of the tension between environment and energy. I have always been a pro environment and at various times have been a little bit involved in environmental campaigns, and yet I've worked in the oil and gas industry. So the tension there is a tension I recognise and can't easily reconcile. Um, I'll give you a health warning. If you're easily offended, look away now because my intention is to make you think, um, not to give you easy answers. Uh, you'll see on my introduction slide um, that I have some personal experience. About 15 years ago, I converted my car to run on biofuel. This was a big thing at the time. We were going to save the planet. We would grow our vehicle fuel. I was involved in a consultation with the government. I registered things properly, did it all right, and drove around 100,000 miles without using any fossil fuel. I stopped because I discovered that I was buying GM soya. It was very small print on the supply chain that was coming from Brazil and almost certainly was being grown on land from cleared rainforest. And that's the kind of painful lesson that happens when you mean well. It doesn't always go to plan. Um, and that stuck with me. And in fact, I now drive around on fossil fuel. There are two thoughts here that I'd like you to hold on to. First of all, look around and what you see, particularly from an organization or a product, does it match the public statements? And you may see people talking a great deal about their environmental commitment, but you need to look at what they're doing and what their products are made with and where they're made. And I would expect that many times you will see a significant tension between those two. Now, hang on. And a thought I also want you to hang on to for a minute, is carbon zero a luxury belief? And I'll explain what it is in due course. Oh, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we
Good,
can.
good, lovely. Right, what is the energy transition? I think we would say it's from fossil fuels to renewable, wind, wave, solar, hydroelectric, but actually countries like Norway, which have gone heavily into hydroelectric, are having less rainfall. Also, we see partly under an EU initiative, the removal of dams, including hydroelectric dams, to benefit the environment.
Hey,
So
Rob, sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
Your slides are not moving, or is it just me?
I have moved my slide. So um, can you see the new slide now?
No, it's still stuck on the same page.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing a minute. Let's come back and
Sure,
find
yeah.
out what happened then.
Okay.
Let's go to, right. What can you see now? Let's go back to here. I'm going to share again, and I'll share the, right, so I'll share this one, and we'll see if this one moves when I move. Can you see that?
Yes, it's on page 2 right now.
Yeah, well, we'll stay on this editing screen and see if that updates when I change. So hydroelectric isn't quite so clear cut. And in fact, environmentalists often object to hydroelectric developments. And where does energy to waste, biofuel and hydrogen fit particularly? I was interested to see that over the last 3 years, over the last 3 years, only 2 hydrogen powered cars were registered in the UK. So if people are talking about the hydrogen economy, they might be exaggerating. I know there are issues with hydrogen and rail, but it's looking like there's going to be very low adoption of hydrogen. I think the other thing about hydrogen to remember is it's not a fuel, it's only a transmission means. I was looking today at something on Australia. They're having big problems. They have a moratorium on nuclear, and yet that's probably the energy they need. Energy from waste, surely we're supposed to be reducing waste. So if we go energy to waste, are we saying, okay, waste's fine because we recover it as energy, so it doesn't matter? I live near an energy from waste plant, and there is an enormous argument going on about whether we should be recycling the plastic collected locally or burning it and sending the smoke from the exhaust back over the town. So energy from waste is far from clear cut. Do we understand the amount of energy from fossil fuel that has to be substituted? I don't think we do. I think we're actually using a lot more fuel from fossils than we account for, and that substituting that is a monumental task. If we mandate EVs, do we have the capacity? Some years ago in the UK, there was a trial, Electric Avenue, and you can look it up on the web. I looked at it and they seem to have buried it rather a lot, but the answer was quite simple. If everybody in a street had EVs, the national grid could not cope and the local grid couldn't cope. And the only way to do it was to introduce smart meters and for the energy supplier to take control of the EV charging and use AI to predict when they were likely to use their car. Fine if you commuted every day, absolutely useless if once in a few weeks you did a long journey, because you wouldn't have a charged up EV. I don't think the situation's changed, and I think they're keeping a bit of a lid on that discussion. I was due offshore in January. I can't go now for other reasons. But why was I about to go offshore? Because gas exploration is racing ahead in the North Sea, not in the media anywhere. So what do the people who are pushing this drilling at the moment know about? They're clearly investing quite heavily in drilling off the UK coast for gas. And is the energy transition really just people in cities? Is it anything relevant to rural communities? And is it just it'll all be electric and it'll be okay? Right. Has that updated?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
Right. Well, there's a palpable sense of relief at this end.
Yes.
So the UK's made big changes, perhaps some of the biggest changes in its energy mix. We stopped coal recently. But it's not such a clear picture. Germany's the EU's biggest economy, and yet they depend partly on brown coal, which is absolutely filthy stuff. They are still running brown coal power stations close to the far east of Germany. They're depressed areas. They need the jobs. They need the energy. And interestingly, when you look carefully at Germany's commitment, they say 52%, but they say of consumption rather than of production. And it does look to me like they're preparing some fine print, which is that they will generate dirty energy, but they'll import clean, and it'll all be okay. I'd keep a watch on Germany. I don't entirely trust what's going on there. Japan, 88% of energy is fossil fuel. They don't have any natural, they import it, but it's a very difficult terrain. All the people in Japan live in a thin strip around the edge. They could go to solar. They are going to solar. After Fukushima, they gave up on nuclear. They did make a mess of Fukushima, but on the other hand, if ever there was a country that needs nuclear, it's Japan. So they've got some tough decisions to make. The USA, we cannot ignore Trump's victory. He stood on an election. Yep. Okay. He stood on an election of drill, drill, drill. That was the second headline. Make America Great, drill, drill, drill. And a lot of people voted for that. We can't ignore the 72.3 million Americans who were very happy with that message. 20 of 51 oil producing nations increased, and other than the USA, most of the oil producing nations are either failing economies or what's the word I'm looking for? Dictatorships. They're not democracies. So if we're going to talk about a global initiative, we've got to take account of the reality. Can I just check you can all hear me and then slides come up?
Go ahead, we can
Yes,
hear
we
you
can
clearly.
hear you.
Yeah, good. It's very open-ended at this end. I feel like I could be in a bubble.
So you're good. If you're
Okay, good.
I would,
Who owns it and who supports it? I mean, we're talking about this as though we are all in this together. But the more I looked into it, the less I think everybody is on board. I think there are quite a lot of people who are far from on board, and some of them are rather important. Now, I'm just going to mention this term luxury belief. I'll ask you a question. Are you familiar with that term?
yes.
Okay, it's going to be important because if anything meets the definition of luxury belief, it's almost certainly carbon zero, because it is predominantly promoted by people who will feel no effect if it takes place, and the effects are predominantly felt and damaging to those who have no say in it. So it is a classic luxury belief, And I think that is going to come back and bite, because increasingly people will feel other people are doing this to me. I don't have a part in this, and they're not suffering. And the great examples are our Prime Minister, 470 delegates fly 5,000-mile round trip to a climate change. We're being told not to fly. Why doesn't that apply to them? It's predominantly the political class who will not be impacted by this, who are setting targets and appear to be competing with each other. I can go carbon zero quicker than you can, and they're then lauded for it at a COP meeting, and really none of their population have come with them. And I think what's interesting, because there has been no proper public consultation, the last UK election didn't provide any opportunity for voting one way or the other on carbon zero, and yet it's probably one of the biggest things that's coming our way. The first real test has been the US election, and there was a clear rejection. And I suspect a number of democracies will be looking at Trump's win and thinking, oh dear, if we include climate zero in our manifesto, could we lose? And that will weigh more heavily on them than whether they protect the climate or not. First of all, they want their job and their pension. Green jobs are often used to gain public support, but I know from personal experience looking at green jobs that an oil platform that will employ 100 or 200 people, a wind farm employs around 3. A solar farm may not employ anyone. Okay, there are manufacturing jobs for solar farms, but they're in China. There are manufacturing jobs for wind farms, but this is fairly organized, efficient production. And once they're made, the operation of these things has very few jobs. And it's interesting when politicians talk about the creation of green jobs in the energy transmission, they very seldom give examples, because it's not looking like there are going to be that many. And I think that's going to be an interesting debate, in the same way that we will have that debate around self-driving taxis. Taxi driving is an important job in many developing countries. What's the benefit of taking it away and automating it? That's just someone out of work. Also, the renewable jobs don't look to be particularly high skilled, which is going to be a problem. Again, urban support, if you go to the countryside, are people talking about needing to remove fossil fuel, or are they really focused on trying to support their agriculture? So I will argue really strongly that carbon zero meets the definition of a luxury belief, and that needs to be reminded to people at every turn. And that unless we can get it out of being a luxury belief, we're unlikely to make a lot of progress. And I mean, this lovely example of Taylor Swift, who's very popular with our current government, who got lots of freebies, her total annual carbon consumption, 8,200 tons, 1,000 times the annual emissions. When Sir Keir Starmer got his free tickets to her concert, I wonder if he said, you have a very high carbon footprint, Taylor. I'll bet he didn't. So global, I'm not sure that there is any real argument for saying global. COP29 was fascinating because we had it in Azerbaijan, which depends on oil. We had the president of Azerbaijan saying oil was a gift of God. That's very interesting, because actually quite a lot of the world is quite religious and would believe that something, a resource, was a gift of God, and it was there for the benefit of humans. So he's only voicing an opinion that is quietly shared by quite a lot of the Earth's population, but it's very seldom said. There is an interesting question, which again also doesn't get asked. To believe in fossil fuel, you must first believe in fossils, and that means you believe in history more than 5,000 years ago. I've spoken to people in the oil industry who absolutely believe that oil is only 5,000 years old, because they're creationists. Now, I don't know how many there are, but if you're going to talk about fossil fuels, you need first to be sure that people have bought into the same Earth history that you have. And my view so far, experiences, once you start asking people, you get some quite surprising answers. Russia, of course, completely depends on oil and is going to pump oil as much as it can, because the only thing Russia wants to do is just destroy Ukraine. The idea that they have any environmental concern is just fantasy. Saudi Arabia is going to push production for political reasons. The Sunnis hate the Shias and vice versa. And so if they can make Iran hurt, then they will. And I don't think they're going to worry too much about the environment. And of course, you've got countries like Angola. It's only an example. If you're pulling your economy out of a civil war, that's much more pressing than climate change. So I'm not persuaded it's global at all, I'm afraid. I think this is perhaps my most challenging slide, challenging for me as well. I'm skeptical about the energy transition. I'm actually skeptical a little bit about climate change, but I'm not a climate denier and I'm not against saving the planet. And yet, having a conversation about the problems of the energy transition and about the problems of carbon zero immediately brings forth a wall of insults, approbation about, my God, you're destroying the planet. And yet we've got to be able to have conversations about this, because I think there's a lot of it that just plain doesn't work. At some point, climate change and carbon zero have kind of morphed into these unquestionable truths where getting funding to prove otherwise is difficult. You will be insulted. There won't be a balanced conversation. Just look at the recent American election. They just threw insults at each other. There was very little balanced debate. BBC, who should be trustworthy, put every environmental story under climate. I'm not entirely sure why. We have a lot of things going on in the environment that we really need to sort out, and they're not all about climate, but that's become the hook to hang everything on. The climate protesters tried, and thank goodness failed, to claim that their actions were justified because they were saving millions of lives and we'd all be extinct if they didn't act. How throwing orange paint over an old master was going to save the planet, no one knows, and the court saw through it. But this is an evangelistic kind of approach. There's no rational debate going on here. The floods in Spain, reported as linked to climate change, particularly on the BBC. We believe 10% of the flood was attributable to climate change. Interesting, when the locals were interviewed, they said there's been an EU project to remove the dams, and these are flash floods. Even if the Spanish floods were due to climate change, it might take a whole generation to only stabilize the temperature, and the most important thing for protecting Spanish inhabitants at the moment is dams, flood relief, and better emergency response. And that didn't get a lot of coverage. Most of the coverage was around climate change. And climate change won't save a single life in Spain because the latency is far too long. I'm sorry, I've got to smile here. Anybody who's been watching the Scottish government will know that this is the first UK government to have a significant Green Party input into governance. And for reasons that are absolutely unclear to me, they joined climate change, carbon zero, and gender reassignment and LGBTQ rights. And if you agreed with any one of them, you were marginalized. How the Green movement got itself so mixed up, I don't know, but they've done a lot of damage. And I think at the moment, you will see that people will turn away from Green politicians because they may agree with protecting the planet, but they don't agree with a lot of the other things that have been bundled together. I know someone is trying to write a book about how did this ever happen. It'd be interesting to see, because I have no idea. But without critical debate, I think we're going to stall soon because people will get turned off. Is it the most pressing issue? And I'm going to ask you a question at the moment. Today, anybody care to say what might be our most pressing fear? Any ideas?
The world going underwater.
No, it's a nuclear war. We are, by the account of the people who know, at the closest to nuclear Armageddon than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have Russian television showing simulations of a tsunami engulfing London by a Russian strike on the North Sea. Now, this is absolute madness, but at the moment we are very close to China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia firing nuclear missiles at each other or at us. And no one wants to join that with, well, if we really care about the planet, how about not blowing it to bits first? Then we can calm down and we can look about long-term things. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a long-term plan for the planet, even though there's a potential war coming. You've got to do both. But when someone tells me that the sea level is going to drown me, that's not going to happen for 200 years. We might not survive the year unless someone gets a grip on what the hell's going on with nuclear proliferation. If you go back to the 70s and 80s, the SALT treaties, they thought they were saving the planet when they got those agreements. Putin pulled Russia out of the SALT agreement 2 years ago when he invaded Ukraine. He's now said earlier this year, Putin rewrote the nuclear doctrine to allow Russia to make a first strike. We are at real risk. And one of the things I see is the environmentalists have only one trick. They can only argue about climate change and sea level. They don't appear to be able to process that there are some other very significant risks that need to be dealt with pretty quickly. Brazil is the largest producer of bioethanol, so they get a high percentage on renewable. People very seldom mention that it's mostly on cleared rainforest. And there is a big battle going on. Rainforest is extremely important protecting the climate. And yet, if you clear it and plant fuel for biofuel, you can still score well on at least one of the environmental measures. Another one people don't want to talk about is plants like CO2. If you have more of it, you have more plants. It's not necessarily good for humans, but it's not bad for nature. And if you go back to Lovelock's Gaia, which I've always subscribed to, the Earth is a living process which is naturally regulating, then Gaia would predict that as the CO2 goes up, the Earth would restore equilibrium. That's been discredited by climate change campaigners because they want the answer to be we have to stop burning oil, not the Earth has self-correction mechanisms. What is awkward about the self-correction mechanism is it might include the extinction of some people. It's good for the planet, it isn't necessarily good for us. And one of the issues about climate change is it's changed from being good for the planet to being good for the humans. And let's just look at the low-lying Polynesian islands. They're often mentioned. They were mentioned again at COP29. The developed world must send lots of money to people who live a few feet above the sea level because they're going to be inundated. Why exactly? Is it bad for the planet if they have to leave those islands? It'll be overtaken by fish, coral. It might be a good thing for the planet, but it's a bad thing for those humans. And so how are we balancing up human extinction versus natural extinction? And at the moment, we seem to be prioritizing human extinction. And yet, with Gaia and in the long term, human extinction could be quite a good thing. So there's a nasty element of self-interest going on here. The other thing is nobody ever wants to talk about the cause and effect timescale for fossil fuel and climate. The best I've seen is that, and you'll see it in that on the side of the slide, we could be talking a century for actions now to make a difference. Are we really going to bring people on board who are going to have significant impacts on their ability to survive? I don't mean wet feet, I mean having any fuel to stay warm in winter, that will benefit 2 generations on. There's a limit to how much people will suffer now for safety in the future. It's like the nuclear war argument. If you don't live until next week, why worry? You know, you've got to get the immediate things right. And I think the control response time scale is very large. And if we're going to deal with this and talk about it, we've got to be honest about that. Also honest about the fact that if we mess up our economies now, we may not be able to afford the major structural changes that we're going to have to fund. If you look, that some models say even after reducing to zero, it'll take centuries for cooling. Can you actually sell that to people who are going to be told they can't have a car anymore? I think it's going to be pretty difficult. So I'm arguing in my last but one point there, we should be looking much more to preserve and protect in the meanwhile, and not hanging everything on decarbonisation, because it might not even deliver what we want it to do. And if it leads to a recession, then you can bet it will come to nothing, because politicians will try to reinvigorate their economies long before they worry about carbon zero. An alternative view, and I think this is an important one, if we care about the planet, what should we be doing? Well, I've got a bit of a list here. They're not my list, actually. I'm trying to find the source because I got it from somewhere and now I can't find it. But habitat preservation, water conservation, equitable distribution of water. No one's talking about that in climate change. Earth's resources as a common resource to be shared fairly. I think that's extremely important. That underlies a lot of the political argument at the moment, and the wars are being fought over water. So water distribution might be more important than climate change. Minimizing consumption. One of the problems I have with carbon zero, and I put it in that grey box, it's fine to have a 2.5 ton EV because you're saving the planet. Why shouldn't you drive a 900 kilo diesel vehicle, which is what people drove 20 years ago? No, you can't have a 900 kilo diesel. You've got to have a 2.5 ton EV for climate change. It's not washing, and I don't think it's going to work. If you go down the we care for the planet approach, have the 900 kilo diesel, not the 2.5 ton EV, which is using a lot of energy to move one person. So climate change actually enables us to feel good about some personal behaviors that are actually quite environmentally damaging. This is where I say it's become a pseudo-religion. So long as you're in your 2.5 ton EV, you're doing the right thing. Drive a diesel car and people will be throwing paint at you and blocking the road, even though it's using 1/4 of the energy. I put here, what about real religions? And I'll an apology, I'm not about to evangelize about religion. There are many different faiths, but if we're going to shift millions of people and their behavior, the religions are important in that. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but interestingly, the Pope has been saying some quite interesting things about climate protection, about shared responsibility, and that might be as important or more important, reaching large numbers of people and changing them, than what politicians say or carbon zero initiatives. And I think we do have to have a look now about religions and what messages and the moral and ethical values that are promoted by religions, because I think they have a role in this, and it could be a good role, actually. And I think we need to think more about that. Would anybody like to comment on that? I'm actually interested in this and struggling a bit how to phrase it and think about it.
Is anyone would like to go?
Yeah, you can just, because I think this is a really tough issue.
Well, yeah, I think from what you're saying, it's in terms of like because they have access to a large crowd of people, that people tend to listen to, what they say. They have influence over their thought processes in regards to how they, take in the information. So
They
yeah, that makes
do.
sense.
And it's at the right level. It's about responsibility, about morality, and actually damaging the environment is on that same kind of axis about responsibility and caring. So I think there is a real role, and I feel we're missing something here. And it's interesting that uh, the Pope with this Laudato Si. I say I don't really understand how the Catholic Church works, but the Pope is promoting important documents about environment protection, and they don't put climate change at the top. They put shared responsibility and ownership and conservation at the top, and I find that rather interesting. So we'll have to see. How did human health overtake climate as the justification? On that right hand side of that slide is a list of kind of the history of diesel cars. I won't go through it now, but the point is that we were strongly urged to buy diesel vehicles, that diesel was going to be the savior because it produced a lot less CO2 and therefore a lot less greenhouse gas and would produce lower warming. Now we are taxing diesels in the UK. Manufacturers are lying about their emissions. Are they lying about their CO2 emission? No, they're not. They're lying about particulates. Are we taxing diesel vehicles, particularly in London, because of CO2? No, we're taxing because of particulates. And the figure that's being given, which I believe is complete nonsense, but who knows, it'll end in court at some stage, is the number of people who've died from vehicle pollution in London. And they're giving figures of 20,000 or something. London's got the highest life expectancy in the UK. So it just doesn't, the data doesn't make sense. But if they're dying from vehicle pollution, they're dying from particulates, not climate change CO2. So how have we gone over to demonizing the vehicles that are better for the climate and promoting the ones that are better for human health? And no one wants to say anything. It's all still saving the planet. And yet it's not saving the planet. It's saving city dwellers. It's not even saving people who live in the country. There's no particulate problem with diesel exhaust in the countryside anywhere in the world. It is all in cities. And yet this has been the great drive to push out diesel vehicles at expense to CO2 and greenhouse gas emission. Surely we should be able to challenge this and say, if you're caring about climate, you're going to have to write off some of the human health, or if you're putting human health first, be honest about it. Don't pretend and hide behind greenhouse gas and climate change. It doesn't work. Top down or bottom up, regulation versus market. Now, I've got a long background working with government. They're almost all lawyers. Civil servants get promoted if they write a regulation. That's that goes on your CV. So they write regulations. It's their preferred go-to tool. Anytime there's a problem, what we need is a regulation. And you'll have seen lots of it. We banned machetes a few months ago. How will that have any effect whatsoever on whether people stab each other? None at all. But that's their route. We'll create a law. It'll all be all right. They will be creating laws as fast as they can about CO2. And most of them will fit into the luxury belief category. They will not affect the politicians or the civil servants. They will affect us. Our lives will get harder and we will get quite annoyed. I'm a fan of Tesla. I have mixed feelings about Elon Musk, but there's no doubt he's done more for the adoption of EVs than anyone else. Has he done that on the back of government subsidies? No. I track Tesla sales. when they have subsidies, they sell a lot. When they don't have subsidies, they still sell a lot. They sell a lot because they're rather nice cars. They're not everybody's favourite car, but they're nice cars. And that's the right answer. The things that are going to save the environment have got to be desirable, nice, usable, and then they happen. Mandating is not a good plan. And we've got an interesting example in the UK. Some years ago, the government mandated the use of low energy fluorescent bulbs. We were going to save the planet by using less electricity and lighting. They're horrendous things. They didn't last very long. They broke. You couldn't see where you were going, and they all ended up in landfill, and they're toxic. What are we doing now? We're using LEDs. Are we using LED bulbs? I'm illuminated by LEDs at the moment. Are we using them because they were mandated? No, we're using them because the Chinese set up a production line, made them really cheap and well, and they're good, and they use a lot less electricity, and the light's good. The mandating was a waste of time, and it actually did more damage than good, because we'd have naturally gone to LEDs. Instead, a load of perfectly good incandescent bulbs and particularly compact fluorescent tubes filled up landfills for a few years, and we've ended up where we were going to end up anyway. So I am not in favour of regulation unless it's something where there's obviously too much benefit in damaging the environment. Yes, step in, use regulation. But for the most part, no. Regulation enables you to make a bad product that's painful, useless, and expensive so long as it's green. The market means you have to make a product that's actually people want. And that's when you get the adoption. And I put down here, trusting government's very low. It is. But also policy changes. The cycle of a government policy change is far too short for most people. Government policy change on vehicle emissions change within 3 years. People buy their cars on a 10 to 25 year life cycle. You can't do it. You can't respond to these things. When I worked in the government, we had a big rollout of our 3-year strategic plan. I look back, every 3-year strategic plan had been changed within 2 years. They cannot leave things alone. They just can't. And normal world, industry, manufacturing can't work on those kind of life cycles. You've got to move much more slowly. And I've just put, you'll see there, that little word dark side developments. I was fascinated by this. It's a thriving business in the UK which takes off all the environmental and emission controls on your vehicle, advertises openly, and people buy it and they're happy. What does that tell us about what the market's doing? Market is happy to decap, DPF, whatever it is, your car. You're happy, they're happy. Something's going wrong if it's a thriving business to de-environmentalize your vehicle. Is carbon zero even viable? I've just put some pictures here, but if you want a farmer in Africa to do better, absolutely the most useful thing you can do is give him some fresh water and a tractor powered by a diesel engine. Productivity goes up enormously. Are we going to say to these people who are coming out of poverty, yeah, sorry about the tractor, we've had ours, but you can't have one anymore because you've got to save the planet? I don't think it's a viable message. That's a picture of the Chinese fishing fleet down on the right hand side. Are we going to go to third world countries, or China's not third world, but still, are we going to go to third world countries that depend on fishing and say, you're going to have to row that boat or put a sail up in future? Sorry about that. But we in the West are worried about carbon zero. I just don't think it's going to be possible. And if you look at that picture of the Mumbai traffic, I've never been to Mumbai. I've no reason to doubt it looks like that in the rush hour. The solution to that is a mass transit system. Can they afford that? Is it even reasonable to expect them to put in something like the tube? It's taken us 150 years to build the tube network in London. So what's reasonable in a big city where people are absolutely dependent on vehicles? Of course, they would be better off with trams and an underground rail network, but that's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take maybe even a century to build. And I love that picture of the car, but that's the way people live. And that simple technology, which is very adaptable, are we going to say to those people, we're taking your fossil fuel away now for the greater good? I don't think they're going to agree with us, and I'm on their side. The American farm is simply look at the scale of it. Could we use electric power to operate in massive rural areas on the scale that we currently use fossil fuel? I don't think we can. Now, I drive my everyday vehicle is a 50-year-old diesel Land Rover that's converted to a camper. I drive it 200 miles, stay in the middle of nowhere for a few days and come home. I thought, I wonder if I could do that with an EV. It's not possible. At 200 miles, you're out of electricity and you're in a field for 2 days. Then you've got to come back. It can't be done. And so even at my personal level, something which I would be tempted to try an EV camper does not work. Aviation. I think aviation is fascinating. I know I'm watching the time carefully, but 95 billion gallons. I know that because I have some contacts in aviation, they pilot tested a civil airliner with biofuel for one flight. Virgin Atlantic did it. I don't think it was a long haul flight, short haul flight. I think it used all the biofuel that the whole of the UK would use in 3 months for one flight. The difference in the scale of the energy you need is so great that I don't think there's any realistic hope, and I don't think anybody's prepared to say so. I tried to do a few calculations. If you take a filling station filling up cars, petrol and diesel on a busy road, a filling station that's always got cars in, always filling up tanks, filling up 50, 60 litres a go. And I would say to you, try this. Try and calculate the energy throughput of that filling station. I think it's pretty close to a small power station. So the energy delivery through fossil fuels is significant, and it's all around energy density. And I don't think we could come close to producing a renewable liquid fuel at the level we need for aviation. This might be the one place where hydrogen comes in, but making hydrogen is not clean. The bulk of hydrogen on the planet today is made burning fossil fuel. So it's going to be greenwash until we can ramp up to levels of production that I think are many times more than we have at the moment. I put high-speed rail there because actually high-speed rail should be the answer. Electric trains whizzing around, but high-speed rail is struggling financially. Most lines aren't profitable, so high-speed rail is quite a hard sell, despite the fact that it should be promising. I put that bit about Brazil. The only number I could find was from 2014, and I do wonder if the numbers were so bad, people stopped doing research or publishing the results. But just under 7,000 kg a hectare, 112 million hectares, and most developing countries have banned fossil fuel for crop. Banned fuel for crop, because food is more important than fuel. And one of the things that's quite interesting is to go down a list, do a search, how many countries have banned biofuels? And the answer is actually quite a few, because they fear starvation more than they fear a lack of fuel. This is really another way of saying luxury beliefs, but we have an awful lot of people telling us what to do and then doing different things. We had a Green MP, Caroline Lucas, who regularly flew the Atlantic and then came out with this wonderful statement focusing on individual behaviour, lets big business off the hook. And yet every other bit of environmental advice was it starts with individual behaviour. So even the green politicians are giving mixed messages. Harris's campaign, Kamala Harris, stood for health and environment and climate change against Trump, who stood for drilling. But Harris is the one who did all the private jet flying and blue, as you see there, because there's an audit at the moment, 2.6 million on private jets in a few weeks. So observing behaviour is going to be very important, and I would say we all need to upskill ourselves on close observation of the behaviours of people who are trying to give us advice on the environment and climate. I put the Shell landmark defeat because it's a curious one. But actually, what the court ruled in Holland recently was that Shell's responsibility was only to its stated commitments. It said it would try and be responsible, it would cut its emissions. It wasn't to what people did with the fuel it sold. It wasn't responsible for global commitments. So that's quite important. It's put a boundary around what a company can be held accountable for. And I think the answer to that one is not, I understand it. The answer is watch this space. Oh yeah, we're nearly at the end, so that's good. What does no one want to talk about? Luxury beliefs. They really don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the richest 1% accounting for more carbon than the poorest 66, especially since it's the richest 1%, including celebrities, that are telling us to reduce our emissions. If we're going to ban IC cars, should we ban super yachts? Actually, I think there's quite a good argument for that. Patio heaters. For those who don't know, a patio heater is heating outdoors instead of putting warm clothes on. Absolutely ludicrous idea. Private jets. What about indoor ski slopes? Dubai make a great deal of the fact that they have an indoor ski slope. Shouldn't we just go somewhere cold to go skiing? Why should we go somewhere warm and go skiing? And air conditioning. And there's an interesting little tension there. Going back 200 years or 300 years, people lived where they could survive. And actually, they were mostly genetically adapted. People who lived in the north were short and round. People who lived in hot climates were thin and tall. And we lived in balance with the temperature where we were. Now we go somewhere hot and we use fossil fuel to power air conditioning. We go somewhere cold and we put on gas central heating. We want to ski and it's hot, so we build an entire indoor frozen ski slope. One of the things that I think we've got to really ask a hard question about is, should we spend so much energy adapting the climate to us? Should we go back to the traditional historical way and be more prepared to adapt ourselves to the environment? Because a lot of energy goes on making environments habitable. Air conditioners in the US are one of the biggest uses of fossil fuels. Why? Doesn't make sense. Move a bit further north. Here's a painful one. Somebody in the developing world uses 300 kilowatt per person, roughly. Developed world, 30,000. Huge range, difficult to get the numbers. We have a lot of politicians talking about we're going to lift them out of poverty. They never mention what they're going to do with all that extra carbon footprint. It's just, well, we don't talk about that. And yet, every migrant into the USA will increase their energy use tenfold. I don't have a view on migrants into the USA, but I do believe someone should actually start talking about what's going on here, because the numbers are starting to become quite significant. Yeah. Should there be a personal lifetime energy allowance? People are starting to ask that now. I think that's a really interesting debate. Is that one way of tackling it? Bit tough for those of us in the developed world, because we've probably used ours up 5 times over already. But that's potentially a more important question than our carbon emissions. And as again, I don't see enough discussion of it. And my final conclusion, which I do actually feel rather strongly about, the biggest risk to us is environmentalists. They, in the name of a good objective, are doing more harm than good. And you'll see on the right-hand side, this happened a couple of weeks ago. A guy had collected 500 bikes to send to Sudan, where he'd set up workshops where the locals repaired bicycles as a job creation, and they then gave them or sold them. It was creating a thriving local economy. we throw a lot of bicycles in landfill in the UK or scrap them. They were turned away by the Environmental Protection Agency because they were classed as waste. And if you read the whole article, the Environmental Protection Agency inspector said, well, some of these bicycles don't work. They've got rusty chains. How can that be exported as a bicycle? Completely misunderstanding that the point was that the people in Sudan were going to repair them, and that was part of their job and wealth creation. So if you've got environmental agencies like that, honestly, what hope have you got? They use simplistic models of human behavior, taxation, principally, punishment, threats. They advocate direct action. You cannot bring lots of people with you. When we had Just Stop Oil people blocking people from getting to work, even blocking ambulances, is that going to win people over to their side? They clearly thought it was. It hasn't. And I would say that now attitudes towards carbon zero are more negative as a result of those demonstrations than they are before. Scrappage schemes. Now, I drive a 50-year-old vehicle and it's completely amortized in its carbon footprint. And yet I am forever being told that I should scrap it to save the planet and buy a modern vehicle that will last 10 years and that'll be great. It actually, we know that's not right. And yet those scrappage schemes are still being promoted. And as I've said there, like the luxury beliefs, they add everyday costs for the majority, and people will not like that. And they're condescending to those of us who are trying to talk about the problems. I know, environmental debate and sexuality. How on earth did that happen? But still, I think that's a good point for me to finish. I'm bang on 4 o'clock. I don't know, David, how you're doing on time. Please, people, try and ask a few questions and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Rob. Yeah, we're literally pressed for time, so I think we'll just take very few questions, maybe 1 or 2 questions, and any other questions that will come up, we'll probably forward them to you on
Email them.
your
Yeah, I'll do
email
my
them to
best.
you.
Yeah.
Uh,
I hope you were all suitably offended and have got some thoughts now.
yeah, now I know why we called you back. It's full of yeah, thought-provoking conversations that make you question your perspective in terms of your outlook on some of these issues. So I don't know if anyone has any question in the group chat. Sorry everyone. We'll probably just spend a little more time, maybe 5 minutes more, and then we'll let you go on with your day. So if you have any questions, you can ask directly or ask in the chat.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chidera.
So can you hear me now?
Yes.
So my question is, you talked about balancing natural extinction with the human extinction. So my question is, how can we balance the natural extinction with the human extinction, where we can obviously see the detriment of the human extinction, hence we have the loss and damages in the COP and things like that. So I feel like we're all looking more into how the detrimental effects of climate change on human beings more. So I don't know how we can actually balance that, because the flood risk is increasing, everything is increasing. So how would you be able to balance that? And for the climate, yes, the world is getting warmer, but I feel like we can see the impact more from the human perspective and not from the natural perspective. So how can we balance that?
Well, the first is I'm very good at asking questions, not so good at answering them, because I think that's a really hard question. Okay, but I'll give you a little example. I think most environmentalists would agree that less people is a good thing, that the global population, controlling the global population, and I don't like the word control because the one-child policy was horrendous in China. So let's not gloss over that. But many European countries particularly have falling birth rates. And you might say, well, that's a good thing. That means the Earth's resources will be shared out more equitably and amongst a reducing number of people. So what's going on? Russia is paying women to have babies. Italy has brought in a get pregnant bonus. So we have countries that are signing up to carbon zero and at the same time promoting pregnancy and more people. I can't make sense of that. Honestly, I can't. Yeah. So I think there is a real tension here. And at some point, if we're going to talk about this, we've got to be honest. I think in your case, if you're talking about, say, an African country, first of all, you need water and crops and food. That's much more important than the climate change. It might mean you need migration, as in you move to a different part of the country. Historically, people did move from one part of the country to another when these things happen. Now we stay in one place and try and fight against the environmental change. You know, in the UK, one side of the country is falling into the sea and the other side is kind of being reclaimed. So we have endless expenditure on flood defences. And last year, the government, or a couple of years ago, the government said, we're going to give up. It's too expensive. We can't fight against this. You're going to have to move. And I think that's what's going to happen. Different crops. But the immediate problems to me seem to be the ones you've got to focus on. You're not going to win people over saying, sorry, you're going to have bad crops, but we're saving the planet. It doesn't work it doesn't work that way, does it?
No. Okay.
I haven't
Thank
answered
you.
your question, sorry.
Yeah, you have a tried actually. Thank you.
So is there any other question? Maybe we'll take one more.
Also I have another question. What's your take on climate finance?
Oh, you mean
Because
carbon trading?
yeah,
Or
exact. Carbon trading, and then the part where they also have where, because at COP29 they actually made a policy. I'm not really certain, but it's like they are going to create like a pocket of money where people can come and take and solve their environmental problems, but you have to return that money afterwards. What's the potential of returning it when you don't even achieve the environmental
yeah, well, there's two questions there. Climate trading is a scam. It has to be a
ah
scam. There's no other way, because it's just, if I plant enough trees, I can fly my private jet. You know, that
yeah,
is
yes,
what it is.
yeah.
And they should be honest about that. Now, grants, and I suspect they will be grants, because I doubt very few will be paid back, because the life cycle's too long. I'm going to give you this money to solve climate change. You'll see the benefit in 150 years. Make sure you pay it back. I don't think it's going to work like that. So I'm not against the developed world funding improvements in the underdeveloped world. That's actually a rather good thing. But you've got to bring the population of the developed world with you, because they're going to be paying for it. And the underdeveloped mustn't feel that they're living on charity. I'm not persuaded these things are going to work very well, to be honest. And as for the carbon trading, it's already collapsed once. I mean, isn't this the second or third attempt to get carbon trading? And the absolutely easiest thing of all is to fake carbon credits. You know, there's some film on the web. They use satellites. There's a picture, and I'm going to we can't trust everything on the web, but it's such a wonderful piece of footage. It's a farmer in China painting the tops of bits of rebar green, so that when they're stuck in a field, they look like a crop from space. Now, I don't know whether it's real or not, but I'll bet you it's going to happen. You know,
Yeah.
because it's too easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
So I think I'll just take one more question. I have one question that someone asked earlier. So it is in regards to the global south. So he was asking in regards to oil and gas, where some countries, like for example Nigeria, are just building back their oil refineries. So what really is going to be the pathway for them in terms of energy transition? Do they stick with the resources that they have, or what should be the ideal pathway?
Okay,
Because
let
you
me
have the
give you
budding generation that
yeah,
has a different perspective to that as
let
well.
me give you an answer. Nigeria is an interesting country. It's a big country, and it's largely poor, and it's resource rich in oil. What do the population deserve now? Actually, they deserve to be safe. It's not a very safe country at the moment. They deserve to be safe, and they deserve the wealth to be better distributed. And the problem with oil in Nigeria is it's not been handled politically very fairly. So there's a problem with corruption and the way the wealth is shared out. But I would say to a Nigerian, it's a bit, pardon the pun, kind of a bit rich coming from us who've benefited from oil to say, sorry, no, you don't get your time in the sun. um, It's the same with deforestation. The UK deforested in the Middle Ages, and yeah, we will tell other countries to deforest. And they look at us and they say yes. And then you had the Industrial Revolution, and look how rich you are now. I think it's fair to say to Nigeria, it's not for us to take away your slice of that pie, but you do need a long-term plan. You do need to do it responsibly, and you do need a long-term plan. But could we stop Nigeria from exploiting their oil if they do it reasonably, responsibly, and build a better, wealthier country that's safer? You know, the risk of war in some of these places is very high, and some of that's driven by wealth inequality. So wealth equality, even on the back of oil, I suggest is something that you have to take seriously.
Mm. Wow, thank you so much. It's been very wonderful. Um, Someone's asking if you can kindly define responsibly. That's context to what you were just talking about.
Um, as in, oh, I see. Okay, responsibly. Well, let's say I just try and give my best chance at a couple of examples. Firstly, reasonably equitable distribution. It's not a small elite that get all the money from the fuel. Secondly, as soon as people have a bit of money, they don't immediately go and buy a great big 4x4. You use the fuel in a way that is not needlessly harming. You use efficient engines, you use good technology to use it, you don't squander it because you've got it for the first time in your life. And I'm afraid to say, when people get something like that, and the UK's done it too, we squandered a lot of our North Sea oil, they do tend to get rather overexcited and waste a lot of it because it's exciting. So the message is probably grow the economy slowly and sensibly, don't get carried away. There's a great phrase from the director of uh, the US Bank years ago in one of the recessions. He said the job of the World Bank is to go to a party and take the punch bowl away just before they all get drunk. And um, it's a bit like that with this, isn't it? You've got to say, yes, you can have the fossil fuel, you've got to have the wealth, but someone's going to have to come along and say, no, we're going to turn the tap off before you waste it all.
Mm.
No,
Yeah,
not an easy answer.
yeah, yeah. I think one last question before you go. I think it has to do with the UK and Europe specifically. So, for in regards to their decarbonization plan, they deindustrialized a lot, and the oil and gas sector has kind of depleted. So, how do you find? So, what's going to be the pathway for the UK in terms of going forward in terms of industrialization? Because if you're going to be outsourcing most of your production to China and the rest of them, it still means you're liable to cost and all those
Mm,
things. But
mm.
then again, there's the energy aspect of it. So you're actually achieving net zero, but you're not producing. So what's the
Well, you've
balance?
moved. You haven't achieved net zero. You've just shifted it to a third world country, haven't you? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
that's the reality. You've moved it somewhere else where you can't see. It's far enough away, so we're all good. Um, I think you can't separate this from migration. From we have at the moment an initiative in the UK to get people back to work because apparently we have millions of people who sit at home. I suspect we do. Um, they were the people who used to work in factories, and the factories are in China. So the idea that we don't have jobs for our population, we export the jobs, I think is going to be tough for any political party. Um, the idea that we can move everything away and only buy stuff that's made somewhere else and where they have the carbon emissions, I don't think it works. And it doesn't work for the economy, for the people in it either. We just end up with people living on benefits who don't have jobs. So it's not working. And I think the thing that's fascinating about the Ukraine war or Putin's aggression is that the work I got in the last year in the North Sea has all been driven by energy security. It's not been driven in any part by climate change, energy need. It's just energy security. So somewhere at the top of the UK government, they've said, forget everything, all bets are off. What we need most of all is our own energy because
Mm,
we cannot trust any of the other countries. And I think you will see manufacturing security come up the agenda as well. We saw it last week. The UK Army bought its new uniforms from China. and there's an outcry. Are you a secure country if your army needs products from a potential enemy? Well, the answer is clearly no. So you'll see an investment in manufacturing stuff to enable us to be secure.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, so I think we can close here today. And so thank you very much, Rob, for your sharing your insight with us. And it's been a pleasure. And
Pleasure for me too. And
yeah,
you won't get a feedback sheet, so be relieved. But can I just say, have you enjoyed it?
well, I have. I hope everyone
Good.
has. Please drop in the chat if you have
Yes, I
enjoyed it.
have also.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Well,
So
that'll be my feedback.
yes, yes, thank you. We'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone. Your LinkedIn link is in the
Yeah.
profile. You
Okay.
can connect with him, and
Yeah.
yeah, let's keep building a sustainable world. So my takeaway from this is we need to find balance, basically. There's no one silver bullet to the
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah.
Everybody fits in, but it's just doing it, like you said, responsibly and sensibly. And yeah, we can actually solve most of these problems. So thank you very much for your time. And yeah,
It's been a
speak to you
pleasure.
soon.
And thank you for
Yeah,
reaching out.
absolutely.
Oh, and
Thank you. I
David,
will.
we share not having
Yeah.
a front tooth.
Very true. I noticed when you came online as
It's
well.
nice to meet someone else.
Thank you. You're welcome. Very
Stay
nice.
proud.
I will. Thank you very much. All right,
Okay.
cheers, everyone.
Bye bye.
Have a bye. Have a good rest of the
I
day.
will.
All right. Regards.